My husband left on a rainy evening that seemed to stretch endlessly across the sky. Clouds hung low, heavy with unshed tears, and the house felt strangely hollow the moment the door shut behind him. He didn't leave with anger or shouting. It was quieter than that, a silence that cut deeper than any storm. He carried his suitcase down the steps, glanced once at the porch light flickering above him, and then turned away without looking back. I stood in the hallway, my hand against the wall for balance, my breath caught between disbelief and the need to stay strong for my son who sat quietly on the couch, his small hands folded in his lap as though he already knew that our world was breaking apart. I thought silence would be easier than explaining. I thought if I pretended everything was fine, maybe my son wouldn't notice the absence echoing through the rooms. But children, they notice more than we think. For days, I moved like a shadow in my own home, cooking meals that tasted of nothing, folding laundry without remembering when I'd washed it, trying to smile when my son looked up at me with eyes too knowing for his age. It was one evening, a week after my husband left, when the world shifted again. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup without tasting it, when my son padded in with his soft footsteps. He climbed onto the chair at the table, his legs swinging as he watched me quietly. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm in a way that surprised me. "Mom," he said, "you don't have to be sad forever. You still have me." The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the pot. I turned to look at him, and in his small, steady gaze I saw something I hadn't been able to see in myself: hope. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them, and I rushed over to hold him close. His arms wrapped around me, so warm and certain, and I realized then that though my husband had walked away, love hadn't left our home completely. It lived inside the bond between my son and me, waiting to be remembered. From that night, I began to change. Not in some grand, sweeping way, but in quiet steps. I opened the curtains each morning to let in the sun. I made breakfast and sat with my son instead of eating on the run. We talked about school, about the stories he liked, about dreams he had for when he grew older. He wanted to build things, he said, houses that never broke, roofs that never leaked, walls that always kept people safe. And in listening to him, I found myself rebuilding too. My own dreams, long forgotten beneath years of compromise, began to stir. I remembered how I once loved painting, how I could lose hours to color in canvas. My brushes had been packed away in a box, untouched, but one Saturday I pulled them out. The smell of paint filled the room as I dipped the bristles into color again, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself. My son sat beside me, sketching in his notebook, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. We didn't need words. The quiet was filled with creation, with healing. But healing isn't a straight path. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I had failed, if I had been enough to make my husband stay. There were moments I caught my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. Yet each time doubt tried to swallow me, my son would say something simple that pulled me back to the surface. "You're smiling more now, Mom," he said one evening as we walked back from the park. "You make the best pancakes," he announced one morning, syrup dripping from his chin. And then one night, as he hugged me goodnight, he whispered the words that etched themselves into my heart forever. "Dad, leaving doesn't mean love left. You still have mine." It was then I understood what had changed everything. My husband's departure was an ending, yes, but it was also the beginning of a love that grew deeper than I could have imagined. The love between a mother and her child, resilient and unbreakable. Months passed. The seasons shifted from summer warmth to autumn's crisp embrace. The leaves fell, painting the ground in shades of gold and crimson, and I found beauty in the cycles of change. My son and I built new traditions: Friday night movie marathons with popcorn, Saturday morning painting sessions, Sunday walks by the lake. Neighbors noticed, too. Mrs. Carter from across the street stopped me one day as I trimmed the roses in the front yard. "You're glowing again," she said with a smile. "It's good to see." Her words startled me, but later, when I caught my reflection, I realized she was right. I wasn't the same woman who had stood frozen in the hallway months ago. I was stronger, softer in some ways, fiercer in others. Then, unexpectedly, love came knocking again, though not in the way I had imagined. It wasn't a grand entrance or a whirlwind romance. It was slow, like the way dawn sneaks gently into the sky. It began with Ethan, a friend from the community center where my son took art classes. He was a volunteer who often helped set up the children's exhibitions, and he had a calm, steady presence that reminded me of quiet rivers, strong, but never demanding attention. At first, we only exchanged polite greetings. Then conversations about paint supplies turned into shared laughter over spilled brushes. Soon, he was joining my son and me for coffee after class, his stories filling the spaces that had once felt so empty. I was cautious, afraid of letting anyone close again. But Ethan never pushed. He simply showed up, steady as the sunrise, until one day I realized I looked forward to his presence. He encouraged my art, celebrated my son's creativity, and slowly he became a thread woven into the fabric of our days. One evening, after an exhibition, as we walked home beneath the stars, my son reached for Ethan's hand as naturally as if it had always been there. I watched them together, my heart tightening and then easing with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Later that night, when I tucked my son into bed, he looked at me with a knowing smile. "Mom," he said softly, "I like him. He makes you smile like you used to." His words echoed the same truth he had given me months before, that love doesn't vanish when someone leaves. It changes shape, it finds new paths, it teaches us to open doors we thought were closed forever. That night, I sat in the living room, the house quiet around me, and I let myself feel grateful. Grateful for the pain that had forced me to rediscover my strength, for the child who had reminded me what love truly meant, and for the possibility of a new chapter waiting to unfold. My husband had left, but my son's words had changed everything. They had shown me that endings can be beginnings, that broken pieces can be remade into something more beautiful, and that love, real love, never truly leaves. It simply transforms, guiding us toward the light we were always meant to find.